faith approach. I just really think that'll be fascinating. The last time I was here, it was really beneficial too. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. And that looks like I got everybody according to my quick scan here. Yes, everybody had their moment to, okay, good. Well, let's see. I just looked at the time and I'm in trouble. But I am grateful that we actually have time together because Shabbos or Shabbat is also not just about prayer and observance, it's about communal connection. And I admit up front, it is a little difficult for me to relate to a screen, but hearing a little more of your background, seeing a person behind a screen gives me a little more of a connection here. And I'll let you guys cut me off at the time, okay, Sherry and Neil, you'll be my guardians because this was an hour that was, first of all, well worth it, but it actually was very, very interesting. This wasn't an hour of, oh, please, let's finish. I'd love to hear more. I'd love to hear more. And each time we'll go around as we study together and just learn a little bit more about each other before we learn about our sacred texts. So what I'll give you, I'll go brief on a lot of things here, but we'll get to some meat. I say that as a non-meat eater. We'll get to the potatoes and carrots soon. I'll just give you again a little background, brief background about how I approach the sacred. And Kalev, I'm not an anti-missionary at all. I'm actually someone who teaches New Testament and tries. This is not a criticism. This is just to let you know where I ground or root.
I'm not an anti-missionary either. I'm a counter-missionary.
Okay.
They're slightly different.
Let's say, okay, so counter-missionary, fine.
Yeah.
My studies of New Testament, I study the New Testament in Greek. I know Greek. I study other faiths also. And the tragedy of Christianity, or its development, is how I don't mind that it developed out of Judaism, and as they say, the parting of the ways took place. The concern is how it lost or divorced itself from its ancient Jewish root and wisdom, which tragically cut itself off from the wisdom and the beauty of the original forms of Judaism, which Paul and Jesus and the New Testament works all express with, hear this, with a very different emphasis. We are not the same faith. We have some very, very similar ideas, more similarities than Jews and Christians realize, but we also have some significant theological differences. And today we won't discuss that too much because I want our focus to be on Torah and on Judaism as we experience it, not the developmental offshoots. But just to give you a 30-second reference for how I walk through Judaism's wisdom. Judaism is my ground and it's my basis for sacred living and for insight and wisdom for life. I make that's an unapologetically admitting up front, I am a practicing and believing Jew. However, while that may be the ground of my faith and how I blossom in this world, my soul, my being is also tilled and nourished and inspired by other faith traditions because their wisdom is truly profound and often expressed. Sometimes, I'll be frank, sometimes even more beautifully than our own, because they express it sometimes with a different phraseology. We all have that same root, but sometimes you hear something in another tradition that just echoes so richly within you that it can't help but make you say, thank you. Thank you for that beauty, and I hope to incorporate that into my life. So the rabbis, in fact, teach people in more traditional world, the more traditional world of Judaism are not pleased with my interfaith engagements and studies. and teachings, especially when I try and bridge some of the Jewish-Christian divide. But I will tell you that I am in good standing with some of the greatest rabbis in history, starting with Maimonides, who in the introduction to a Shmona Parakim, the introduction to a section of his writings, he speaks of taking the truth from wherever it emanates from, wherever it comes from, accept the truth. And right when he says that, before that, he's discussing wisdom that he gained not from Jewish theologians, but from philosophers and all other forms of wisdom. So I do follow in that path. I believe in Judaism, and I believe that my Judaism can be deepened and enhanced, as can my person, by other faith traditions, because they're drawing on that same wisdom through a different lens. So with that, let's start our Torah study with, as I'm sure you always do, with a blessing. And we won't do the full blessing. We won't do the full blessing. In the traditional siddur, it's about a page. Judaism is wordy. But we'll start off with the first blessing that we all say over Torah, and then we'll discuss that for a moment. So all together, don't worry if we're not all at the same time or the same cadence, but we'll say together, Baruch Atah Adonai,
Adonai,
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
ha'olam,
haolam,
asher kedishanu b'mitzvosav, v'tzivanu l'sayk divrei seira. So blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler, sovereign of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to engage in Torah study. Amen, everybody.
Amen.
All
Amen.
right, so there's going to be a few befores. And I'm looking at the time here. All right. Does anybody know the Torah blessing that we just said is not the only Torah blessing that we say as a blessing over Torah? There's actually another word. I'm not talking about the blessings that follow from the Torah, from the Mishnah, and from the Talmud. I'm talking about specifically la'asok b'divrei, la'asok, I'll say it in modern Hebrew, la'asok b'divrei Torah. Does anybody know to engage in the words of Torah? Does anybody know there's another blessing? It's not in the Talmud. The only blessing in the Talmud, in the Gemara, in Brachas, is la'asok b'divrei Torah. Does anybody know there's another blessing? Let me just see hands. Besides the folks who know me. Okay. All right. Well, guess what? There's another blessing that replaces la'asok, to engage with Torah. And it's found nowhere in the Mishnah. It's not found in the Talmud. The only blessing in the Talmud is la'asok. The first usage we see is about 1,000 years ago. There's about 3 thinkers who write of it early on. And one of them is Rambam, Maimonides. Another is Rav Amram Gaon, and then the Rif, a great halachist. They're all about 1,000 years ago, and they changed it, or they had a source for changing it. They didn't just make it up. And instead of saying, who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to engage in the words of Torah, it says not la'asok, it says al divrei Torah, who commanded us over or concerning the words of Torah. And my first question is, since they gave us a blessing over Torah to say, there has to be more than just words. There has to be intent and meaning and purpose to guide us into our Torah study, that it has to be deeply engaging. Because very often, let's be honest, we study, but it's not engaging. So it's telling us to engage with the words of Torah, la'asok b'divrei Torah. The question is, which blessing just personally draws you more into Torah study? the blessing that we just said, to engage in words of Torah, la'asok, or he's commanded us over or concerning words of Torah. Any thoughts?
Engaging for me, because that's exactly where I am in my study. I'm trying to learn more. I want to be able to speak with God in his language as well, but I want to actively be living his education, his lessons. I want to actively be engaged.
Yeah. Everybody else agree? Hands up for agree. Seems like engage with is a quote. I'm saying this in quotes because any great, if Rambam says something different, I have to give him the benefit of the doubt that he has something very profound that I might be missing. But on the surface level, it seems like la'asok, to engage with the words of Torah, is really more instructive than, yeah, he commanded us over the words or about the words of Torah. That seems much more casual and distant and almost, yeah, I'm over the words of Torah. It's concerning. And then I'm not going to do it this time. Next time we'll go into this more, because I always teach on more than one dimension in a study, because we have to enter our way into the study through the rabbinic mind and through the rabbinic model, which is study. But on the surface level, I will tell you, Bunny, that was my immediate reaction years ago. I've known about this for years, obviously. But upon thinking about it, I actually found something extremely profound about the simple, he's commanded us concerning the words of Torah, or over the words of Torah. It's much less specific directive. It's a much less specific directive, and it's less focused. And next time we will discuss this a little more. I'll leave it to you to think, as you say in your own Torah studies for these next, well, I guess it'll be about 4 weeks until we're together again, to ask yourself, how could 3 great rabbis of real stature, I mean, one is a Gaon, that's a huge, huge rabbi in terms of stature. How could they simply change what it says explicitly in the Talmud? Because the Talmud were Amoraim and Tanaim. Those are more ancient than the Gaonim, or the Rishonim, or the Achronim. They're different time periods. But a later rabbi never undoes or changes what an earlier rabbi does, because there's a hierarchy and a respect that we honor this and we develop, but we don't change except on very rare occasions. So I will leave it, simply because of time today, for you to reflect on how the simple word of he commanded us over the words of Torah, rather than to engage in Torah, is at least equally as engaging and probing and thoughtful and deepening, because it seems like engage is much more intensive and present with the text. So unless anybody wants to offer a short thought, and then we'll continue it again in a few weeks. Okay, let's continue then, because there's a lot to say on, I'm going to say a few things on this blessing, because it's such a rich blessing. I was going to do, we could do a whole class on it, but this time we're not. What we're going to do now is, as a preparation for our Torah study, I want you to see the model, because everybody brings a different derech, a different approach or way into Torah. I want you to see how I work with Torah. This is one way, by no means the only way, and it's not my only way, but I want to give you a sense of who I am before we wander through the text of Pinchas, right, the weekly portion. I want you to see how I wander through Torah itself and how I discover or uncover the deeper layers of what I believe is in the sacred text that we call Torah. So if we could, on
Joe?
the, yes,
Joe, Sorry. I apologize. I just wanted to share. I finally found the verse that I wanted to pull up in relation to your last question about the difference between La Asok and
Aldivrei, Sok Divrei and
yes,
Aldivrei.
just the thought that that from the teaching, from a rabbinic teaching, that God counts a good thought as a deed from Kiddushin 40a. And
Okay.
I just wanted to share that. That
Okay. Well, maybe you'll develop that in a few weeks when we go
Yeah.
over that.
yeah,
Because it
Thank
still
you.
doesn't, one thing it doesn't do, and I asked actually a posek, a halachic scholar, a legal scholar, because I couldn't find anything else. I found the oldest
Mhm.
sources I could, but no reasons. And he didn't know why either. He didn't know why it was changed either. So
Sure.
that means it's left for us to discover. All right, so Sherry, if you could put us up on the screen as this is our Torah study officially, just not the official Parsha study, but this is going to give you a sense of how I approach Torah, of how I go through a text. So if we could go to chapter 1 of Pirkei Avot, or for my daughter's sake, Pirkei Avos, because it's always troubling for her to hear me speak normal Hebrew. And it's just as troubling for Sarah to hear me speak it's modern Hebrew in Israel. So that's why she says, let me speak. So I know you're all laughing at that. Let's go to chapter 1 and number 4. So we've got 1 there. Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Yosei. We say Yossi, but it's written Yosei. So Yossi ben Yoezer. I didn't choose it because his name is Yossi, just like mine. But we're dealing here, this is a unique text in the Mishnah. How much time do I have here to say? Nothing. All right. This is a Mishnaic text that is different from every other text in the Mishnah. It's not just legal. It's in fact, the rabbis speak of it as lifnim mishuras hadin. It is beyond simply the form and the letter and the structure and the purpose of the law. It's ultimately leading you into the essence and the ideal and the soul of the law. And we often won't see it in a lot of the text because we don't know how to read it well, myself included. But this is how the rabbis view this. It is an ethical treatise that is leading us into the spirit of where law should ultimately make us blossom, which is beauty and soul and grandeur and love and. So as far as our study, it's dealing here with the transmission in this first chapter from Moses down through the ages. How did we get the Torah? How was it received? And right now in this 4th Mishnah, we're developing the pairs, what they call the zugos, the pairs or the partners who study. And we've got Yosef ben Yoezer, and he's from a certain area, and then we've got his partner that he studies with. Okay, and this is, let's see here. So he says here later on, right near the end, he says, let your house, is that how it says in English here? Let me see here. Let thy house, fine, I'll do it up there. Let thy house be a meeting, a house of meeting for the sages, and sit in the very dust of their feet, and drink in their words with thirst or thirstily. So I will tell you, we're not going to analyze this entire Mishnah, but I'm going to just give you one sense of it. It says, let thy house, let your house, Yehi veisecha beis vad lachachomim. Let your house be a meeting place for the sages or for wisdom. And what we're doing today is all of us, we are coming together and we are allowing our house to be a dwelling place and a meeting place where we engage in the sacred study of holy wisdom, in this case, Torah. So thank you for living with this, because we should be meeting with wisdom. It should be a partnership that we have. But the next phrase here, and it says, sit in the very dust of their feet. I will tell you that's a it's the normative translation. But what I want you to understand here is when it says veheve mis abek ba'afar raglehem, it really doesn't have the idea of sitting in it. There's no base. I'm not saying there's no basis in the functional meaning, yes, but the root of this text is not talking about sitting in the dust of their feet. Something with the dust, but sitting has nothing to do with misabek, which is the Hebrew word here. It's the bottom of the third line, the word all the way to the right, misabek. This word actually has to do with wrestling. And it's only, in fact, used 2 times in the Torah. In Tanakh, what am I talking about? In the entire Bible, it's only used twice. And guess where it is? It's in Genesis 32 when Jacob is wrestling with whatever that person, being, arch enemy, Esau, however you want to interpret it. He was wrestling with this being. That's the only time this word is used. So I want you to understand that we're bringing wisdom in. We're making our house a place to meet. It's a meeting place for sages and for their wisdom. And what do we do with that? We want to wrestle. We want to wrestle, not sit. We want to dust up through our wrestling in their feet, in their way. We want to wrestle with the guidance and the wisdom that they are walking in and that they have left to us to struggle with, to wrestle with, to meditate on, to just, it's not just a casual. It fits much more with the blessing of la'asok b'divrei Saida, to engage. So it's an engaged wrestling. I want you to understand that, and then drink in their words with thirst or thirstily. Vitama, do we even, I'll ask us honestly, to not publicly, but ask yourself, do I thirst for wisdom? Do I thirst for these holy words? And not only these holy words, but all wisdom. Is that something I thirst for? I want you to understand that because this is my purpose in coming together, so that we can share and meet with wisdom, so that we can wrestle together and grow, and so that we can ultimately quench our thirstings for holy wisdom and insight. That's the first Mishnah I want to give you as a background to help you see into who I am as a Jew and how I approach our texts. I think the next one, just brief, maybe we won't do the third, I'll just do one more. Let's do Mishnah 6. So you're at 5, go up to 6 in chapter 1. It says here, speaking again of different pairs of study partners who received the tradition from previous greats who ultimately received it from Moses. So here it says, Yehoshua ben Parachia, Joshua ben Parachia, and Nitai the Arbelite, received the oral tradition from them, the previous 2. And here's what Yehoshua ben Parachia says. It says here, appoint for thyself a teacher. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to go into the rest of it. In the Hebrew, it's aseh lecha rav. And I will tell you again, this is a Hasidic way of reading it. That's not a bad translation by any means. We need guides to help us along the way. But this word aseh lecha rav is also literally understood. And I mean, this isn't fancy grammar. I'll tell you when I'm given a poetic interpretation. This aseh lecha rav is also, according to Hasidus, make yourself a teacher. We need others to guide us. We have to wrestle with their wisdom and sit, quote, unquote, in their feet and drink in their words. But ultimately, we also have to acknowledge that we ourselves sometimes are our own greatest guide through life and with the wisdom that is guiding us through life, through Torah. Torah means, the language, one of its root meanings comes from hoira'ah, which is instruction. So We are seeking instruction, but we also have to be not just that rabbi or that Buddhist priest or that Catholic priest or that Hindu sage. Also, make yourself understand that you have that deep wisdom within you, and you can sometimes be your own greatest teacher. So, Aseh Lecha Rav. So we are here together learning. Yes, I'm teaching, but I'm also here to tell you that you are your own greatest teacher sometimes, and I have much to learn from you. And because we'll do another Mishnah from Pirkei Avos to give you more background about me the next time. And so right now, I'm going to give before we jump in again to the Torah portion, I would normally skip this, but it's too critical for me to skip, in my opinion, at least. We are in a sacred time period in terms of the Jewish calendar where things change. Starting a few days ago, for the next 10 weeks, it's not the normal time or time reference. We are in a special period of time. It's a 10-week period, and it's broken up into 3 weeks and 10 weeks. And these are all significant numbers that we will discuss another time. But none of those numbers just happened by chance. They came up with 10 and they divided it up into 3 and 7. Could have been 14 and could have been 6 and 8. This is intentional. So we are in this period right now of the 10 weeks, and of that period, there's a sub-period within this, or a substratum, and it's called the Telos, or Telosa, it's Aramaic, Defuranasa. It's the 3 weeks of affliction, or the 3 of affliction. This is a period in Jewish history that has been sadly tragic, and we've had a lot of sadly tragic periods. But in the Mishnah and in the Gemara, it discusses this time period as being uniquely tragic, and the significant number of events that took place during this time, this historic time period, is remarkable. And one of them was the breaking of the tablets, when Moses came down from the mountain and saw the golden calf. Another one is the breaching of the walls of the temple. And another one was the offering, one of the daily offerings, the Tamidim, the morning and the afternoon offering. Those weren't able to be performed anymore. And again, there are a couple of others, and the reasons why, maybe we'll pick it up next time because we'll still be in this 10-week period, although we'll be in the upside of it. But I just want you to understand that right now, the reason I'm emphasizing this is you can't study this Parsha without knowing where we are, because according to the rabbis, Pinchas is the focal point. If Parshas Pinchas is read before what is called the 17th of Tammuz, we read one Haftorah, the normal Haftorah. If this week's Torah portion, Parshas Pinchas, happens after the 17th of Tammuz, that's when everything starts to tank, we now start a different Haftorah cycle. We are in a different period. And in fact, the Midrash speaks of it. It's about a 1,500-year-old Midrash, 1,300. They date it differently. It says from Genesis up until the 17th of Tammuz, we read Haftorahs that relate to the Parsha, Dome LeDome, similar to similar. There's a theme in the Torah that relates to the Haftorah, the prophetic reading. But from the 17th of Tammuz up to the next 10 weeks, we change the Haftorahs. They are not thematically related to the Parsha anymore. They are now related to the overarching time period that we are in. And it's a tragic time period for these 3 weeks, 3 weeks down. And the next 7 weeks after that is a time of rebuilding. And we will discuss this more, but right now we are in this Torah portion, Pinchas, where we read, instead of, we would have read from the normal portion for Pinchas, if it happened before the 17th of Tammuz, would be from 1 Kings, and it deals with Elijah and that still small voice where he's fighting all the, the Baal worshipers. that would be the normal one. And the reason they associate it with Elijah, because Pinchas is considered an incarnation. I mean, Elijah is considered an incarnation. There's a connection between them. Pinchas and Elijah have a connection. Okay? Pinchas and Elijah have a connection. So right now we're going to read, if we read it, it would be from Jeremiah 1 up to chapter 2, verse 3, I think it is. So take note of the Haftorahs. See if you can read into them something deeper than simply the historic context that it's giving you, and try to see that the rabbis had something in mind that gave us an opportunity to uncover something very broken within us that needs rebuilding at our sacred center, at our sacred core. And so that's where we are this week with the Haftorah. And next week, the next two get even worse. Ultimately, when we get to Devarim, right around Tisha B'Av, that's the Haftorah that is read. And then things begin to build. So right now, we have to uncover the broken roots of our being, of our sacred walk, of our emotional walk, of our heart, so that we can find those broken parts and then learn to rebuild them again during the 7 weeks that follow. Too much info, maybe? I don't know, but that's the background. As for now, I'm going to try and keep it. Let's see, where are we? Okay. Parshas Pinchas. Wow, that was a long intro to Parshas Pinchas. Normally with Parshas Pinchas, we start at chapter 25, verse 10, and we go to verse 30, chapter 30, verse 1. And I can see that because it's right there. Thank you. Let's go. The theme of Parshas Pinchas is generally, there's 5 themes in it. There's the continuation of last week's Torah portion from Balak, which is always troubling. And I'm actually not going to discuss what it's called the zealotry of Pinchas and his lovely actions in this week's Torah portion. Because you've probably heard things on it 100 times, and they all focus on the zealotry of Pinchas. And yes, the rabbis praise it, but here's why we condemn it. I don't want that to be our focus today, especially because of time. It deserves much more than 4 minutes or 5 minutes. And following this, there's a census. And then we get the daughters of Zelophehad. And then Moses chooses a successor in Joshua. And then we have something everybody loves to read about, all of the offerings for the holidays and the regular days. So I thought we would study the blood and guts portion of this. No, next time we'll do that. Although I do love that. What I thought we would do, just to give us something to leave with, more than Pinchas was a zealot, and I don't want to focus on bloody offerings in a temple, and how we shouldn't have even had to have discussed that Zelophehad's daughter should get a portion of land. Okay, there's a lot there in all of those. And if I did it for the whole hour and a half, I would have gone through all of them to help us see more than just the dark side that we all can see. But I trust the rabbis always have a greater sense of wisdom, and they saw something deeper in it that I probably missed. So I try to struggle through that darkness and find something light in it. So what I thought we would do for today in the last few minutes, and I will keep it brief, I promise. Let's go to Numbers 27, verse 20, because this is the portion. It's dealing with the 1, 2, 3, the 4th section, the 4th main theme of the Parsha, which is Moses choosing a successor. So let's go to Numbers chapter 27, verse 20. I guess I can just read it up there. And just in case you're having, this is an attempt at humor. It's right after 27:19. I hear you all laughing, even though I can't see you. I feel it. So what do we have here? 27, verse 20. All right. So again, the translation is, does everybody have it? I'm assuming I'll read it. Everybody, I see 4 people. Everybody's got it. Okay. You 4 speak for the rest. So 27, verse 20. Again, this is the 4th main theme of this week's Torah portion. And it's dealing with Moses choosing a successor, because he realizes again against, he begs one more time in a few more parshas, in Parshas Va'et Hanan, in Deuteronomy. He's going to beg again to get into the land, but he realizes, hey, I'm not making it. He had some hopes, but they were just dashed in the previous section. So we have here in verse 20, V'nosata mehoidcha olav. They translate that here as invest. This is talking to Moses for Joshua. Invest with him some of your authority. I don't like the translation, but that's fine. So that the whole Israelite community may obey him. Fine. Does anybody else have a different translation, just curiously, that you want to? I'd love to hear if there's any others before I offer my own. This is the idea for sure. It's not wrong, please. It's not wrong. And does anybody have a different translation, whatever version you're using? Let's see what I got here. I got an English one. Okay. Not all at once, though.
It's showing the Contemporary Torah by JPS. This is typical of the Jewish Publication Society. I've got every edition of it from 1917 to their newest one. They read much more alike than they do differently, so they haven't normally updated the language very often, except for the last.
Normally what? I'm sorry?
They normally don't update the language in
Yeah.
it very often. The biggest leap was in their 85 edition and their newest one from last year. Other than that, they read.
So what does it say? I agree with you about the JPS. I struggle with that translation. They're so intelligent, these translators, and sometimes I just scratch my head and say, if you did that in my Hebrew class, I would actually grade you down. I don't know what you're thinking.
So,
But
Rabbi,
I did the
this
same
is
thing.
why I
Yeah.
tell everyone, get a Tanakh that has the Hebrew text, because every translation, including my favorite one, is wrong.
Yeah. Well, look, they emphasize, I would never say wrong. They emphasize an element that may not be as prominent to our hearts. But
Yeah.
I did the same thing with the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Torah by Jews about 2,200 years ago, Alexandrian Jews over 2,200 years ago. I was looking, I got an English one just to compare the Greek and the English with my own thoughts. And I remember thinking, were you high, sir, when you translated this? And the funny thing was, when I looked at an academic review of it, that was one of the verses that they absolutely panned. And he's the editor of the whole text, so whatever. But there's many different translations. They're all very good. Sometimes some are better. I'll try and say it positive. What does the JPS say? Let's hold on here. Do you have it, Christo?
It's pretty much the same thing as the Contemporary Torah in mine. Invest him with some of your authority,
Okay.
so that the entire Israelite community may obey.
Okay, fine. Anybody else have anything different than invest and authority and obey?
Yeah, Rabbi, I do here. This is the stone
Okay.
Chumash.
Perfect.
It's really different, actually. You shall place some of your majesty upon him.
Okay, now
So
we're
that
getting a
the-
little closer. You're my
so
homie,
that the-
AC. See, that's why it's AC
Yeah.
and JC. See, we're tight.
Right?
My initials,
We're tight.
JC.
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful.
So that,
Anybody else have
yeah.
anything different
Dad,
from that?
now I may be mistaken,
Mhm.
but isn't it saying to give him some of your humility? Hod?
Hod isn't humility. Hod isn't, Hod is never used as humility. Of course, a leader has to have that. That's not the shoresh, the root of this word, or in any of its usages.
That's
It's
very
often used of
interesting
God.
because in my Sfira Omer, the little booklet,
Oh, okay.
translates
So now we're getting into
Hod.
Kabbalah. Okay,
Okay,
fine.
sorry.
So I'm talking, okay, so folks, okay, that's my daughter. We, yes to everything you're saying, Yael. It's
Mhm.
just right now,
Mhm.
not Kabbalah. Not
Okay, no,
Kabbalah.
understood. No,
Kabbalah
I
has
didn't realize.
No,
Okay.
no. Yeah. I know what you're talking about. I know what you're saying in terms of Kabbalah. Yes,
Uh-huh.
but I want to keep it a little more focused
Understood.
today to get the grounding before we get into the attic or the heavens.
Yeah.
You know, I want to
Mhm.
first get us grounded on earth before we blossom into the heavens.
Mhm.
So
I've looked.
the
I
idea,
just
though,
checked-
folks, is when you read Kabbalah, there is an entirely different reference and vision and insight, and it is brilliant. But we first have to, I can't do differential equations or linear, or advanced calculus before I've done multiplication. You got to have the basics here. I got to go through algebra 1 and geometry and algebra 2 and trig and pre-cal and cal 1 and cal 2 and cal 3, and then I can get into the real math. So Kabbalah is real math. So
Hey, Joe.
yo,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, yo,
I just want to say that this verse, you shall give him to interpreting Hod as majesty is reminding
yes,
me
yeah, that's
of Saul and King Saul, and how he lacked, even though he was a king, he lacked that inner sense of, he lacked confidence. And he, during the time of his anointing, that was when he was to understand for himself, right? Make for himself, understand for himself his own leadership role. And that if you are going to lead, the people need you to have a sense of confidence, to exude that, so that the people will listen. Kol adat b'nai Yisrael yishma'u.
yeah. Right. So let me first develop the idea before we apply it to someone, but you're right in its application. But let me ground the verse. First, we have to get out of invest him with authority before we start developing it. So just give me like 2-3 minutes and then we'll all blossom. So I don't like personally invest. It says, is it wrong? I think that's a very different sense, because the idea here, I mean, in one sense, yes, it sounds like more than what Nasan is having in it. That's the ultimate purpose or intent. But the idea is place upon him, give to him, okay? Place within him this idea of from. They say this, let's say, place, invest him with some of your authority. The Hebrew is much more exact, and I think we have to be very careful in our reading. Not just literal. Literal, you can be a fool. Even the Kabbalah says, if you read it literally, you've ruined the text. So, but sometimes we have to take into account the language. And it says, you shall place upon him, or you shall place from your hod. We'll get to hod in a minute. You shall place from your hod upon him, upon Joshua, so that everybody will obey, hear, understand. Okay? The idea here is the word hod is not a common word in the Hebrew Bible. In fact, this is the only time it's used in Torah. The only time it is used in all of Torah. It's used 23 other times in Tanakh, mostly in Psalms but not that many times. The idea here of hod is, I think majesty is a much better reference than authority. Even though he is giving him, quote, authority to be the leader, it's not about authority. It's about the root idea here is a combination of these terms, and I'll explain why. It's glory, majesty, honor, and splendor. Now, we can throw those words around, but how often do we see a leader who has glory? Okay, no comments. Keep your mute buttons on. How often do our leaders, and I don't care if it's the leaders of a country or the leaders of our faith, how often do they have majesty? There's just something majestic about this person's life, his heart, his wisdom, his way of being. Okay? Honor. How often am I simply honored to be in this person's presence? This word in Hebrew, you often have to translate 2 or 3 words to convey the sense of one. But Moses here is giving over his leadership role to a person, Yehoshua, Joshua. And the language here is Moses gives from his own hod, mehodcha, from your hod. He is giving from deep within himself the glory and the honor and the majesty of himself to another, so that Joshua can then lead us along the way, and so that all Israel will hear. The first word is hear. I know it says obey, so that the community may obey, but it says lama'an, right? Lama'an yishma'u. That's how we translate it. Chant it. So that they hear. Who's the they? The entire congregation of Israel. So that they hear. Well, wait a second. How can they hear? That's the first meaning. How can they hear glory, honor, and majesty and splendor? You don't hear those quality traits. You see them, you encounter them. Why the language of hearing? It also does mean obey, but it also means to understand. When they see Joshua, they are going to understand that this person before them, not a perfect person, but this person before them who is now going to lead us, has been given the same grandeur, the same light, the same beauty, the same honor and glory and splendor. I know I'm repeating those words quickly, but I'm telling you, these are traits that we all have to have. The rabbis teach whatever happens to the sages, to the Israelites in the Torah, is also a sign for us. Ma'aseh avos simon labanim. So whatever is happening here specifically also has relevance to us. We're Moses, we're Joshua, we're the congregation of Israel. Each one of them is a part of us. We're Adam, we're Eve, we're everybody. Metaphorically, those are guides for us. So the question is, first, Benosata mehoitcha olav. He, Moses, is giving from his glory and his majesty to Joshua. I'll just ask you this week to reflect, or right now to ask yourself, how can I live this week, limiting it to a week, but for life? How can I live giving from my own inner being, which actually is quite beautiful and quite glorious and quite majestic if I connect with the deeper part of myself? How can I live life giving over some of that glory instead of the usual fill in the blank that we give people, that I give people? Can I at least start off with placing and giving and sharing and investing in the sense of placing it into another person, investing in their future by giving them from myself, to give them something better from me, from within me, that they can now have upon them, so that they live a better life and lead their communities, their families, or themselves in a better way. We all need someone in life to give us that glory, but we also have to be willing to be the giver of our own glory, and that doesn't diminish us. So my thought, my closing thought, or only thought on the Parsha, and my meditation is V'nosata me'odecha love. That's how we chant it. I hope that you look within, settle within, dwell within, and find that inner glory and majesty and beauty and splendor that is there, that we often lose sight of or get distracted because of life, and we lose sight of it. My prayer is that we come back to that place of inner glory and majesty, and that we then share it with somebody else who may not be living a life of real light and glory and majesty. We offer it to them, because that's what we're to do. And so, on the flip side of that, I pray that we also live like Joshua. Joshua is our model. That I pray that somebody out there is willing to give me from their hod, from that majestic part of their being so I can grow within and so I can live with more light. Because damn it, sometimes I am just a black hole of a human being and I need more light. I have to be willing and humble enough to say, I need your help. I want to sit in the dust of your feet. I want to wrestle with your wisdom. Okay? Let's meet together again and share in this wisdom. And let's grow together. And I look for learning from you, from your Hod, from your glory, from your wisdom, so that I can grow. And I hope something that I shared today with all the background gave you a sense of how I work my way into Torah, walk through Torah, wrestle with Torah, and try and receive the Hod, the majesty and the glory that is Torah, and from everybody else who is out there that is willing to share their Hod. I pray that we're all willing to receive that Hod, but more importantly, to live differently, because bring a little more Hod into this world so that it becomes more glorious and more majestic. Shabbat Shalom. If anybody has any closing thoughts, I'd love to hear them. And thank you. Thank you. And until next week, unless I've been banned and blocked, we'll get more into the Torah next week, although I never just jump right in, because I always believe that we have to work our way into the depths to mine those gems that are there. They're not right there on the surface, so we have to prepare our minds and our hearts. We wrestle with each other, we connect with each other, we surrender to each other, and hopefully we live better because of each other. So if anybody has a closing prayer, closing thought, I'd love to hear it. And if not, we'll see you all in a couple of weeks or a month, and I'll see some of you next week.
I was looking at the Hebrew text a little bit closely. And I never like it when a translation uses the English word here for Shema. I know ASL from my deaf friends. A hearing person will sign this for listen because it's referring to their ears. My deaf friends don't use this for listening. They use this because they listen with their eyes. So instead of saying hear, shouldn't the English translation say listen? Because you've got to pay attention to listen.
Okay, so I appreciate your question. I do. And I often discuss this when I compare. I do comparative theology with New Testament or the Septuagint and the words that it uses. So Hebrew, this is going to go way over, but bless you, Krishno. I would say the problem is not the Hebrew, the problem is the English.
Yeah.
The Hebrew word itself, and this is always a problem in translation. The Hebrew is always, when you do a simple gloss, this word in Hebrew means this, it always eviscerates the inner sense, but that's true for Greek, for Sanskrit, for Latin, all these ancient languages. Trust me, it is tragic in one sense to read them for what it leaves out. But just understand that the word hearing is often listening and hearing in English have a nuance. But they're both functional in terms of auditory functioning and involve the ear, but there are nuances of difference, what they connote and what they denote. In Hebrew, it always has both, and actually more than that, but sometimes the emphasis is given on one. At the Tower of Babel, when it says they heard them, it doesn't mean they heard them, it means they understood. Other times it means they obeyed. It really does have these dimensions. It's a question of which one is more prominent, and that's where interpretation comes in, and maybe they're right and maybe we're wrong. I can only tell you here's why I feel it may not be that, or why I think it's this, but you're 100% right, and I appreciate that you're here, because now I'm not the only one who wants to go more in depth, and if we lose the rest of you, I promise I won't do it as much, but me and Christo will talk more.
You've got my email address, but here's why.
Okay.
Here's why every Christian New Testament should include their Greek text side by side. I've almost never found one, but every Jewish Tanakh should have the Hebrew text next to it.
It should, but it doesn't help if you don't know Hebrew deeply, to be honest.
I can help them with that.
It's difficult, but I don't want to keep everybody else for this wonderful. I want to continue this, Christo, but anybody else have any closing thoughts before we say, as we do in Hebrew?
I just want to say before everybody logs off, I just want to thank you, Rabbi, in bringing your beautiful family here. Sarah and Yale, it's great to see you guys here, and welcome to our community, and look forward to seeing you.
No, they have
For a
several.
long time. Yeah, thanks for muting that. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.